How is it, everyone? And welcome to your first class maths tutorials. And in this video, we are going to look at another example or another question on factorization. Earlier in other videos, I've mentioned out that the general form for a quadratic expression or a quadratic equation is ax squared plus bx plus c is equals to 0. So this is basically the general form for a quadratic expression or a quadratic equation. And I've also mentioned that for it to be a quadratic expression, the highest power of the variable that we've got is supposed to be 2. Anything that is greater or less than 2 does not constitute a quadratic expression. And in the previous video, I've laid out the steps that you're supposed to use for you to factorize if you get a question on factorization or on quadratic expression. And the first step, I've already write it here, is to find the product of the first term and the last term, which is x squared and negative x. If we multiply these things, we are going to get these terms, we are going to get negative 6x squared, right? This is the first step. And the second step I've mentioned that is to find two factors, which when multiplied, they will give you minus 6x squared. That is the multiplication that you are going to, the result that you are going to get when you multiply the first term and the last term. And also, when you add those very same factors, you're supposed to get the middle term. And in this scenario, which is x, right? That is the second step. And the simplest way to find these factors is to list the factors of the existing terms. So the middle term here, it's more like we've got 1x. The factors is going to be 1 for this middle term, and for negative 6, the factors of 6, we're going to say 2, 3, and 6. It's going to be a positive or a negative or a positive. So out of these factors for the middle term and the product of our first term and the last term, you are going to realize that the factors that we need is negative 2 and positive 3, such that if we rewrite this quadratic expression, x squared, which gives us the next step, step number 3, which is to replace the middle term with those factors that you found. So here our factors, the factors that we found are negative 2 and positive 3. So here we are going to replace those terms in the quadratic expression. So we are going to have x squared minus 2x plus 3x minus 6, such that when you say negative 2x plus 3x, you are going to get a positive x. So this is simply rewriting the quadratic expression. And the reason for that is for us to group the quadratic expression such that on these two terms, we will factor out something, and at the result, and at the end, when we also factor out something on these other two terms, we are going to get the same bracket. So here we are going to say x, we factor out x on these two terms, and in the bracket we are going to have x minus 2, and this x minus 2 must also be the same after factoring out something on these last two terms. And on these terms, we are going to factor out a positive 3. So that when we say a positive 3 times x, we get a positive 3x. Positive 3 times negative 2, we get a negative 6. And then after that, we combine these terms outside the bracket and take one bracket on these two terms. So we are going to have x plus 3, this one, we've combined it with this one, and here we're going to have x minus 2. So this is going to be our solution after factorization. So in other words, if we remove this bracket, or if we expand this bracket, we must go back to this quadratic expression, or which is this one.